Sup Niners faithful, big time breaking news in the world of the NFL as Odell Beckham Jr. is officially going to be on the free agent market as him and the Cleveland Browns have agreed to mutually part ways. Now, the specifics of this mutual parting are yet to be fully unveiled as of the time of us hitting this record button here. Is it more of Odell's not getting his full contract payout? Are the Browns going to cover half? Did they come to some sort of financial agreement? Because throughout the morning, I was getting constant ESPN updates that Odell's agents, Odell's people are working with the Browns hand in hand to make sure this gets done. So it sounded like as much of a mutual parting of ways as they could get, they were on the same page here that this needed to get done. I said this on the Slump Buster podcast just this past week that I knew that they just couldn't let this persist throughout the entire season. They just had to make a move. And sure enough, according to Adam Schefter here today, it is on the table. There's a list of potential places he could end up. The Saints, the Seahawks, the Patriots, and if you're watching this video, the San Francisco 49ers are one of the top locations associated with Odell Beckham Jr. Now, assuming he doesn't have to pass through waivers, this would be the opportunity for the Niners to strike, because I believe the Seahawks are still ahead of us in the standings. And what I mean by ahead of us, I mean below us. So at least that's cool. The Seahawks are below us in the standings, but not in the case if we want Odell Beckham Jr. Jose, do you want Odell Beckham Jr.?
You know, I kind of have to pause and think about it. Usually when a big acquisition like that is available, I'm all for it, right? I'm all for having you know what, with Odell Beckham Jr., I still think he's capable of being a really good top tier receiver in this league. Obviously, his situation in Cleveland hasn't been able to show that, but you know, you kind of have to throw in the factor that he has Baker Mayfield, a banged up Baker Mayfield as of recently with his team. He's just had a bad relationship with that team, usually the past couple of seasons. But you kind of have to take a step back and see how the chemistry would work with the current wide receiver core that we have right now. Because what was the main problem for Odell in Cleveland was he just wasn't getting the ball. Can we promise him that he could get a lot of the ball with the current system that we have? I don't think we could do that. We saw already with Brandon Ayuk how he was limited in some of the targets early on in the year. If we're struggling to get the ball to Brandon Ayuk, I mean, you throw in Odell Beckham into that mix, and you know, who are you willing to piss off more? You know, a guy that you drafted in the first round or a guy that you barely picked up. And then you still have obviously Deebo Samuel, who would still be, in my opinion, wide receiver one for the team. He would be the number one option for Jimmy Garoppolo. And then you also have to throw in the mix that George Kittle is possibly coming back this week. That's another receiving target and a pretty big one for Jimmy Garoppolo. So at this point, I think we kind of have to pass. In my opinion, we pass. What I hate having to not have the opportunity to sign a guy and a talent like Odell. Yeah, it would be, you know, not the best as far as, you know, acquiring talent, but I think we're set. I think we're fine where we're at wide receiver. If there was a possibility of getting somebody else through trade before the trade deadline, maybe like a Brandon Cooks, not that much of a character guy. The
trade deadline already passed.
Right. That's what I'm saying. Yeah. Before the trade deadline, if there was a possibility, maybe, but Odell, I just think the same issue would happen in San Francisco, where he would just not be happy with the amount of targets that he would get.
Well, here's the good news. If he goes through waivers and the Niners claim him and get him, the rest of his contract is void after this season. So after next season, we don't have to worry about Odell if it doesn't work out. We just have to worry about this season. And I wanted to come in with the same kind of mindset you came into it with, but you know who doesn't pause? You know who doesn't hold up and think about these decisions? The Rams, the Cardinals, the Seahawks, all three of the teams in our division. Like I mentioned, the Seahawks are on this potential list of suitors. Would we rather see Odell go to the Seahawks than to end up in San Francisco? Absolutely not. We don't want to face him in that week 10 game or week 11 game when we have to face the Seahawks again. We don't have to see Russell Wilson having to, do I want Tyler Lockett? Do I want DK? Do I want Odell Beckham Jr.? No, I think this is where the Niners have to be aggressive. The Niners have been far too passive of a team aside from that 2019 year. And look what happened to them in that 2019 year when they decided to be a little bit more aggressive, go out there and get a Emmanuel Sanders when he was out there. They end up going to the Super Bowl. Do I think Odell still has that prime Odell capabilities in him? No. And I've said as much plenty of times, whether it be on this podcast or other podcasts, I have said that I think Odell is far from that 2014 solo catch OBJ that earned him fame. I think he's been living off purely his name at this point in his career. But I think adding more talent is never a bad thing. You know who doesn't ask how much talent there is on the roster and how it's going to work? I don't know. The 2017 Warriors, the 2020 Brooklyn Nets, the Lakers. You look at these teams, they say, get me as many talented guys on this roster, and I will find a way to make it work. I will find a way to make this team go to the championship. I will find a way to get to the playoffs. And the San Francisco 49ers need to get to the playoffs this year. We talked about how important it is for Kyle. We talked about how they're doing this half in, half out approach where they're rebuilding but still want to compete. Well, if you want to compete in 2019, or if you want to compete in 2021, and I think we both agree that we want this team to compete in 2021 because we're not playing for draft picks now. We have to make sure that this is as good a run as we can make it. I think go out there and get OBJ. It couldn't hurt. You mentioned how are they going to divvy up the rock? Listen, 44% target share for Deebo Samuel. That's going to have to come down at some point, regression to the mean. He's dealing with a calf injury right now. So we know that Deebo, as much as we love him, his health could come and go at any second. So adding depth isn't a bad thing. Brandon Ayuk, yes, he has to step up. And part of the reason you draft first-round wide receiver is so he doesn't get expensive right away, which kind of defeats the purpose of having to go out there and get an expensive guy like OBJ. But you're getting him on a bargain at this point in the season. You're not trading away any assets for him. You're not paying the full majority of his contract. Go out there and get him now. What else are you going to use cap space for the rest of the season? Oh, the 20 guys we get on IR because we are the San Francisco 49ers. At this point, there's no reason for the Niners not to. It's little risk, all reward for me. That's why I think they should just do it. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But I'm telling Jared Rice, hey, hit up OBJ, hit up OBS, Odell Beckham Sr., and tell them, bring that guy out to the Bay.
And you see, I had that kind of mentality as well. I had that kind of mentality when other guys were available, like Antonio Brown. But I just think there would be a little bit of a problem there in the locker room once he gets in there and he's not seeing as many targets as he would like. I mean, that's always been his case every single season that he's played in the NFL.
Listen,
and if that
I feel you, man. And Kevin Stefanski's offense isn't that much different from Kyle Shanahan's offense. Yeah. But you just know, like, we just need one more threat in this offense to really get it going. Ayuk stepped up a little bit, but are we going to count on that week to week when he's been in and out of the doghouse? Trent Sherfield's been non-existent. Jawan Jennings has been non-existent. We have to rely on Mohamed Sanu. Trade out Mohamed Sanu for OBJ right now in our rotation. How much better does that look? Travis Benjamin shouldn't be even seeing him the field, and he won't if OBJ is in our lineup. You have your three wide receiver set right there. OBJ, Ayuk, if we could get anything from him, and Deebo. And if Deebo, for some reason, can't go in future weeks because of a calf, well, let's see what OBJ can do for us.
Right. No, as a talent part and, having a three, receiver core of Odell and Ayuk and Deebo, the talent-wise, that sounds amazing, right? But, I mean, you still have George Kittle there. I mean, they still love to throw the ball to running backs. Jeff Wilson Jr. is also coming back. He likes to, grab the rock from the backfield every once in a while. I just think it'll be the same situation as Cleveland. I think he'll just eventually, the only thing wouldn't be as bad here in San Francisco is that he wouldn't have, 3 seasons where he's felt like he hasn't been used to his potential. He would just have the half a season and then he could just leave and go somewhere else. But I just don't think you risk, even, messing up the locker room or messing up the chemistry in the locker room just for one guy, especially for a receiver guy. The more I come to realize when I watch these NFL games, these receivers are replaceable, every single one. Who had Deebo Samuels being the second leading receiver in the entire league coming into the season? Nobody had Cooper Kupp as the number one receiver. It's more of the trenches guys, the offensive line guys, the guy who's actually throwing them to receivers. I mean, hell, the Green Bay Packers went into Arizona and, ended their undefeated season without their top 3 wide receivers. And now I'm not saying that that's going to be the case with San Francisco with, a pretty diminishing talented and not as talented wide receiver group in San Francisco. I just think you don't want to risk losing the locker room or even losing any chemistry between any of these receivers just for one guy. I think if he goes to LA, that's fine. Let LA have him. You mentioned LA makes all these moves. Well, guess what? Guess where that's gotten them? The same place as the Niners has.
No. I mean, come on, man. Like, we would absolutely swap places with LA as far as how we finished the last 4 years and how they finished the last 4 years. You're still talking about one Super Bowl appearance apiece, except the only difference is the Niners have missed the playoffs in every year that the Rams have made the playoffs. I think that that's a hard thing to really sell at this point, that you would rather swap places with the Rams given their chemistry issues. I don't know. They've been non-existent. I think that this is just the type of aggressive move you have to make. Again, you're 3-4 right now. I don't think that you have much to lose. You're talking about losing the locker room. Listen, if they lose this week to Arizona, or they lose the next 2 to Arizona and the Rams, they're going to lose the locker room anyway. The locker room may have already been lost at some point during the season that we don't even know about because we're so happy that they beat the Bears this week. We still have a lot of questions that need to be figured out. I just think that this is potentially something to be answered. And I think it's not just a production standpoint why Odell got fed up in Cleveland. I think it's also a Cleveland standpoint why Odell got fed up in Cleveland. I don't know how you compare the Bay Area, Santa Clara, San Francisco to being in Cleveland. No disrespect, Ohio natives. I'm sure it's very nice out there. But for Odell going from New York to the Cleveland lifestyle, I'm sure was already a huge change in itself, that I'm sure he would just love to be in a bigger market. I'm sure he would like the opportunity to go out somewhere for a organization that, and then just mentioning the Niners versus the Browns organizationally, I think that Odell would be happy to go and work every day and throw that Niners logo on his body as opposed to having to throw on the burnt orange Cleveland Browns unis every day. I think that's also part of it. I think he'd just be so happy to be in a different situation that I think he would overlook it, at least for the remaining 8 games of the season that we have.
I just think, if the teams were lining up to get Odell Beckham, which they're really not, if you look at it, the only reason our teams are even looking to add Odell Beckham is because it's past the trade deadline and you could get him basically for free. Why didn't teams line up and offer a 3rd round pick, a 4th round pick?
Because they knew that he was going to get released. They had leverage in this situation because they had the feeling that this was going to come, especially when I think Odell Beckham Sr. actually screwed over his son in terms of getting a trade, because whenever he put out that video, I think it made it much harder to trade him because many people thought that the Browns would just end up cutting him, which they're doing right now. So teams are lining up knowing that they have the opportunity to get him for basically free, should they have the cap space, versus having to trade any assets. You mentioned a 3rd round pick. I wouldn't trade a 3rd round pick for Odell. I wouldn't trade a 6th round pick, especially when I know I didn't have to. We know we didn't have to. So that's why I think that it's worth it to me. I guess, we're just separated on this one. But hey, I'm telling you, if Odell's in that Niners uniform, don't tell me you won't smile. Don't tell me you won't show like.
I'll
some support
I'll
to the
smile
boy.
a little bit.
Rocking that 13 around, rocking that gold and red. I'm telling you, that will look nice on Monday Night Football against the Rams.
He would look really nice in that jersey, but Jarvis Landry thought he was going to look good in a Cleveland jersey. All of Cleveland, Ohio thought they, got a bargain whenever they got him from New York. Look how that turned out. You mentioned it. We're not that different from Cleveland, by the way.
I think we're different in terms of organizationally, city-wise. We've definitely have a lot more culture than Cleveland, Ohio. at this current juncture
Hey,
in time.
whoa.
Well,
The dog
okay, maybe
pound.
I'm calling out a whole
The
city.
dog
That's
pound, hey.
maybe a little unfair for me. I mean, we are from New Mexico after all. Self-deprecating there. All right. Well, hey, we've tashed it out as much as we can. We've said our piece. We've said our thoughts. We want to know your thoughts, Niners faithfuls. Drop that below in the comments. Yes or no, OBJ to the Bay. OBJ to the Bay. Let's get it trending. Let's go. Like this video, subscribe to the channel. More Niners topics to come. Of course, we got the Niners Cardinals breakdown coming to you this weekend. We'll see you next time.